All right. So I like to think of myself as this Japanese train. I don't know if you're familiar with the Japanese trains concept, but they really leave on time and they come on time. That means that even if they come a little bit too early, it's trouble. So I'm definitely not going to start early, but I'm going to start on time, and on time is right now. So thank you very much to all of you who did come slightly earlier to be on board of this train today and to listen to what I have to tell you about storytelling and how you can use this ancient yet very, very efficient method in everything that you do regarding your public institutions and public administration and everything that you want to convey the messages. So right, just like the title of the presentation goes, I really want to tell you a story. Okay, that's so many of us really start with this. I want to tell you a story. And think about it, even in the daytime or when you leave work or when you go home, you very often just start by saying, oh, I have to tell you this story. Or, you know what happened today? I'm going to tell you an amazing story. So, we are a natural born storytellers, and that is probably because it is the most efficient and the best way to convey messages and to sell ideas. Okay, so if you are here to listen how to use storytelling, you're the very best place to be. And now I want to tell you the story. And actually, the story happened in 2009 when two guys, friends, Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn, one of them is an economist and data scientist, and the other one is a journalist, wanted to see if stories actually sell, and by sell I mean by adding worth to the object or to the subject. And they've published the results of their experiment on a website called Significant Object. What they really wanted to see and verify is whether the question, do stories tell and sell, can be answered positively. So what they did, they performed a really, really well-designed experiment. First, they acquired 200 objects. For those 200 objects, they've paid $250. So, if you do the maths properly, and I think this is not a complicated math, $2,050 divided by 200, that is approximately $1.25 per object. And by object, I mean just stuff. And it was not pretty stuff. I mean, judging by the price, it couldn't be, because the stuff were like, this old, not used definitely, but old SARS mask that was just donated to them. And so the cost was for them zero. There were other artifacts like this pink horse, okay, that was, definitely bought online, but again, the cost was not really huge. It was $1.40. Then there were objects like this, an Indian maiden figure bought online, and the cost was not very much because it was less than $1. So there were 200 of objects just like that. The objects that people either donated or that they bought on their eBay, but for the total amount of $250. Okay, let's keep it in mind. So, what they did later, after 1 month, after they cataloged everything and they did new descriptions to those products, to those objects, they once again sold those 200 objects online. Okay, so everything that they acquired, everything that they bought, that they were donated, they sold once again, this time on eBay. And what they got for all those 200 objects together? $8,000. So compared to the $250, I think that we can see here a huge increase. And of course, if there is anyone here that deals with finance, they would probably quickly do the maths and see that it's 2,750% of an increase. Okay, so bear that in mind. What did they do to increase the value of those objects by 2,750%? Well, they wrote stories giving meaning to those apparently meaningless objects. So what they did, they invited authors, journalists, and book writers to write stories about each object. So each of those really objects that were apparently insignificant became significant just because someone gave them the meaning with a form of a story. Okay, so they actually, once again, you can check this whole project on significant objects, but what they did prove is that stories sell. And by sell, I mean then not only just sell, but they do increase the value of the object. And they can also increase the value of your message, of your idea, of your campaign. What stories also do very well is they boost retention. And by retention, I mean that every time you want people to remember more, every time you want your senior citizens or any other person you're communicating to remember more from your campaign, from your information leaflet, from the website, you better use stories, because those stories, they really boost the retention of the material. Stories also facilitate understanding. Okay, when it comes to understanding, we humans operate on two sides of the spectrum. Something can be something can be easily cognitively overloading, or it can lead to a cognitive ease. And cognitive ease is this wonderful moment when you read something like a leaflet or an announcement, and you get clearly what it means, you get clearly and understand every little detail of it, and you feel like there's a nice flow there. That's a cognitive ease. And when we are in a state of cognitive ease, which is highly, highly desirable, we think that we trust more the message. Okay, so that is incredibly important. Of course, there's a downside to it. You know, every time somebody publishes fake news, they really make sure that the fake news is cognitively easy to digest. So, you know, it makes it more credible for people. But you too, you have an amazing power of good, true ideas. And by using storytelling, you can facilitate understanding, because stories usually create cognitive ease versus something that is cognitively overloading or cognitively straining, which is, you know, everything else that is not a story, you know, just raw facts and just not structured data. That is something that usually causes cognitive strain. Stories also very well communicate meaning, and they basically root them, or they basically plant what I would say most of our beliefs. Okay, if you think about it, most of our beliefs that when we were children were shaped by the stories that either our parents or society or teachers told us about. So, you know, the same way goes for the adults. They can also be shaped by the stories, because stories communicate meaning, and by so they also shape and form beliefs. Stories also very well unite tribes. Okay, tribes like communities. Okay, if you create a common story for your facility, for any public institution that you work with, and you will unite your tribe of people, let's say senior citizens, around that story, and that story gives meaning to them, it's a great thing, because then they become more loyal to you, and you matter and they matter. So that is the thing that definitely is worth examining. So those are the perks of each and every good story. Okay, they increase value, they boost retention of the material, so they facilitate also understanding, they communicate meaning, and they unite tribes. Okay, so what else do you want to have from a great message? Well, not much, I suppose. So let's think about this boosting retention thing. Okay, so I'm going to explain the boost of the retention and how well it works, and to convince those of you who might be slightly skeptic, I want to tell you another story. And this time, this story happened slightly earlier, in 1969, well, still in the 20th century. And this time, it is a story about two scientists, American scientists, Bower and Clark, who wanted to check whether stories, especially narrative in a form of story, are good mediators for serial learning. So, given the fact that very often the information is supposed to be something that people learn, remember, that is also very important. They later on published the results of their experiment in a journal, and the title of the research paper was narrative stories as mediators for learning. As you can see, narrative stories. Okay, so it's very important. As in any experiment, they had a large group of participants that they later on divided into two groups. Okay, in both those groups, the participants were giving a similarly same task, which was, you've got a list of words. Well, the words were in English because the experiment was in English. You better learn those words, and later on we will see how much you remember those. Well, the words were also random. Those were like lumberjack, dot, skate, hedge, colony, duck, furniture, stocking, pillow, and mistress. Totally random words. And in the first group, the people were told, okay, you've got the list, use the list, try to memorize as much of the words from the list as you can. Later on, we will see what are the results. And in the second group, the people were said, okay, you've got a list of words. Write a story using all the words that you've got here. And later on, we will see how much you remember those. Okay, so those were like two random assigned groups of people who had similar tasks, but with a little twist. Of course, in the first group, nothing really interesting happened, but in the second group, something interesting really happened. And that was the stories that emerged. Okay, so here's one sample of the story. That is, you can see it contains all the words, and it's a story about lumberjack that darted out of the forest, skated around a hedge, past a colony of ducks. Then he tripped on some furniture, tearing his stocking, while hastening towards a pillow where his mistress lay. A truly, truly exciting story. But what really excites me much more is the result of the experiment. Okay, so 3 minutes after the experiment, there were no significant differences between the two groups. So people could remember, they could retain equally quite a lot of material from this list. But what happened 2 weeks after is really interesting, because there was a difference. And what was the difference? Well, the people who were using the list could barely remember 13% of the words. That is the equivalent of you putting out an important message to senior citizens and putting it in a form of a list of bullet points or paragraphs even. And then after 2 weeks, they barely remember 13% of the information in that message. Not too good, especially if all that information was important. But what happened to the group that was using a story? Okay, well, that's what happened. Okay, I don't know what your guess is, but you can think of a second, okay, what is your estimate? How would you guess for that? But I don't know if anyone guessed, that is 93%. So 93%, that means that 80% more. Well, of course, I cannot guarantee you that every time you do either a list or facts versus the same facts, but in the shape of a story, that it's always going to be 80% better. But it's always going to be significantly better. So, every time you form information, it's good to think, how can I shape it in the form of a story? And to tell you what, I even replicated the experiment. What does it mean to replicate? Well, to actually repeat it, but in slightly different conditions. This time, I also have quite a substantial group of participants. This time I was working with one of the companies in Poland, and they gave me access to their 100 managers, the C-level managers. So it was quite a substantial group that I randomly assigned to two groups. And, what I did in those two groups, I both gave them the list of the facts regarding feedback. Okay, so the facts where you can feedback on work only, action or behavior. You can only have the feedback if you have an active consent. So people want to say, okay, I want your feedback, please give me your feedback. I also tell them that, the feedback had to be delivered personally. It cannot be delivered by somebody. And then it should never, ever be done publicly, especially when the person who is supposed to get the feedback is not present. So once again, those were the facts. And in the first group, I gave them just the list of facts during a sort of like a workshop seminar condition. So it was like workshops, and in one group, so we were giving them the list of to remember from the feedback. And in the other group, I gave them the story that incorporated all those facts about feedback. Okay, the hero, or rather heroine of the story, was Katie Melua. You might know her. I mean, those of you who remember one of her songs, which is a beautiful song, which she managed to count each and every single bicycle in Beijing. Okay, but this time she focused also on one rather astronomical number, which was how many light years are we from the edge of the universe. And in one of her, in the same song, she actually sings, and the song, the verse goes. I think it's a beautiful piece of poetry. It's a work of art, as every work of art, it deserves a feedback if it must. Okay, so you can actually feedback someone's art, because it's, you're not actually talking about the person, you are judging or discussing their art. So you can do that. And one person actually wanted to do that, and that was Simon Tsai, the author of the Big Bang Theory, who is an astrophysicist, a very acclaimed scientist, who actually listened to the song and got very nervous. And he decided to give Katie Melua feedback on the song. What was troublesome for him? Well, first of all, he thought that Katie Melua got the numbers wrong, because it's not 12 billion light years, it's actually 13.7 billion light years. So, she made an error. But that did not bug him the most. What bugged him the most was that she actually said that that's just a guess and nobody knows what it's true, where actually he and other scientists worked very hard to prove, that it's a stable fact that we are that much far from the edge of the universe, okay, observable universe. So he decided to give Katie Melua feedback. And there is nothing wrong about giving feedback, if you feedback the art. But what he did, he actually did not ask Katie Melua whether she wanted feedback. Okay, so there's point number one. He did not actively ask, do you want to be feedback from an astrophysicist? Okay, maybe she would have said yes, but he didn't ask about it. But what's worse yet, he gave her feedback publicly in an article, and he published it so that the whole world knew, and she didn't know that there was a feedback behind it. So what he wrote actually was an article titled "Katie Melua and Bad Science," when he actually really did a rant about her using the wrong numbers and suggesting that the scientists don't know whether that's the true fact. And what actually happened is that not only Katie Melua sings and writes poetry, but she also reads The Guardian. And that's where the article was published. And, so one day she was probably sitting at home, drinking her morning tea, opening The Guardian, and there it was, an undeserved feedback from an astrophysicist. Okay, so she got kind of sad and even upset maybe, and she called Simon Tsai. Okay, apparently if you're Katie Melua, you get the phone numbers of whoever you want to. So she called him and she said, Mr. Simon Tsai, I'm really sorry. I should have known better. I have even been in the astrophysicist, classes in my high school. I should have known better the facts. So I do hope that you accept my apology. And with that apology, you will accept a new version of the verse that right now sounds like this.
We are 13.7 billion light years from the edge of the observable universe. That's a good estimate with well-defined error bars. And with the available information, I predict that I will always be with you.
What I really love about this is that she really nailed it this time using, proper astrophysicist science. Okay, but whatever someone gives you the feedback, that is not actually the feedback because it's done publicly without you giving consent to be feedbacked, and it's delivered in a rather maleficent way. I'll tell you, either do nothing or be like Katie and win the game. Okay, let's not forget that that was the replication of experiment. I wanted to see and verify whether people would remember the rules of feedback better if they were taught with the list of facts, or with a story that actually conveyed the same message. It was the message there, but it was in the form of a story. Actually, it was a story that most people smile at, so it gave them a little bit of an uplift. So what happened? Once again, 3 minutes after, there were no significant differences between the groups. So that kind of did not surprise me. Okay, it's a short-term memory working, so that's not a difference there. But what happens after 2 weeks after, where the long-term memory should be in place and when long-term retention of material should come into place? Well, once again, there was a difference. There was not such a huge, significant difference as in Bauer and Clark experiment, but people using the list could, recall 21% of the message, and people who were using the story, they could recall 72% of the feedback rules on average. So that proves once again that, when it comes to the retention of the material, there is no better way than a story. And why does it happen actually? Well, because whenever we hear just facts, and of course there's nothing wrong with the facts or data or numbers or information, but whenever we hear that and it's not structured, the only areas in our brain that light up is the Broca and Wernicke's area. Those two areas are responsible for the speech pattern and recognition. So we do understand the words. It's not like we don't understand the words when someone says that to us. But whenever we hear the story, our brain lights up just like, I dare say, a Christmas tree. All the other areas light up. Okay, all the other areas light up, meaning that there is the olfactory cortex, that is the smell. Even if we don't smell anything and someone tells us about something smelling, like a nice pie or a nice cinnamon bun in Stockholm cafe, you feel it. And, someone can talk about somebody moving or fighting or going or straining, and also our motor cortex that is responsible for movement also lights up. That's almost as if, projecting ourselves in the story and living what the hero of the story does. So I find it really exciting how much we can do just with the story and how much we can operate on this beautiful machinery that we have, which is the brain. What else is also interesting? I mean, if you ever consider that you would want to perform something like mind reading or telepathy with your audience. Okay, let's say you want to really have your senior citizens rely and relate to your story so much that it's almost like telepathy. There is a proof that stories work this way. And the proof comes from one professor who actually performed an experiment where he scanned both the brains of the person who was an active narrator of the story and the person who was actively listening to. And what happened is that the patterns of the brain were exactly the same. Those people were as if they had, synchronized brains altogether. That is actually extremely beautiful, I think. Every time you'd share a story in the form of a video, in the form of a nice message online even, your brain and the brain of the person reading have experienced the same patterns or almost the same patterns. Okay, so, this is really exciting news. But some skeptics say, okay, but, if we have to communicate some policies or if we have to warn people, for example, against coronavirus next wave, or if we have to, explain the policies to the stakeholders or to the actors or to senior citizens, we better use data because very often statistics are so powerful. And I do agree with that, but there's one thing about the data that we can also make better. Okay, so the statistics sometimes can be really grueling or sometimes can be very exciting. I mean, depending on what sort of data you show. And very often people who listen to storytelling, they say, well, that's nice, but maybe for marketing. But if we are working in a public administration or public institutions and we want to communicate some data report, statistics will be so much better. And I say, well, to a certain extent, and I will show you why, okay? And this time I'm going to take you to United States of America in 1936. That was not the best time around to be around in America, as you can imagine, because that was the Great Depression, okay? Actually, it was like almost almost the end, but it was the height of the worst situation on both the job market and also in production and also in agriculture, in farming. So in the United States, from the unemployment rate grew from 3% to 33%. So that's staggering. Almost 1/3 of Americans were jobless. The production in numbers actually dropped by 50%. And in agriculture, it was even worse. And who worked in agriculture at that time in United States of America? Well, mostly migrants who were working and they were living in those huge camps outside of the farms, and they were cheap labor, actually. And the worst thing that happened was that, of course, there was no social security for them. There was no healthcare for them. There was basically no federal or state help for them. So when they were losing jobs because the production failed or the farming industry was in trouble, they were not getting any help whatsoever. So did America knew about this situation? Of course they did. They knew the statistics and they knew the numbers. They also knew the numbers of how many migrants there were in those camps, and they knew what were the numbers, what were the average income of such family. But they were rather hesitant to help, and so were the public institutions and the federal both and state institutions. Until one day, when this photo with an according story hit the newspapers and later hit people's brains and hearts. This is the story about Florence Owens Thompson, who was one of those migrants who worked in those camps. And this story was taken after she had made the decision that was crucial for her and her children's survival. The story goes that at that moment, she actually just sold her tent. That was the only shelter for her and her 3 children, only to have enough money to eat for the next week. Okay, this story of Florence Owens Thompson, who had her husband, but her husband was far away from her, trying to make some living in some other far up state, hit the newspapers because Dorothy Lang actually took it, and she titled it "Migrant Mother." And that's the story of Florence Owens Thompson that changed people's perspective and minds. And from that moment on, with just one picture, one story that hit the newspapers and hit people's brains and hearts, they started organizing to help the people who were in trouble, as if the statistics finally got a story, a face, a reliable hero that people can relate to. And, in this case, it was a mother who had to make a very difficult decision, whether it's a shelter or food. I would say what better story there is. Of course, this is a very sad story, but at the same time, it's a very relatable story. People who see here a mother making a very difficult decision, and of course they started helping. And they started helping from that on, and of course pushing towards the federal and state public institutions to help those people in need. What happened here is that when people were getting the statistics, they were suffering from something that is called scope insensitivity. So what it seems is that for our brain, stories, even if they are just anecdotal proofs, they work so much better than statistics, because numbers and stats do not seem to impress us. So whether they are huge numbers or that are success numbers, or the huge numbers that suggest there's something wrong with the world, we see it, but we don't react to them as well as we react to the stories. Okay, so here's another interesting example to prove that, which is once upon a time, two guys again performed an experiment where they give a group of participants a story saying that there's an oil tank spill in the sea, and obviously any one of you had seen those terrifying images of birds and other animals trying to get out of the oil, of spilled oil. This is horrible. And in those three groups of participants this time, in those three groups, people were notified that you can either help in one group you need to help 2,000 birds. In another group there was 20,000 birds, and in yet another group it was 200,000 birds. Okay, so the scientists thought, okay, how will the number of birds affected influence the willingness to pay to help the donations? Okay, so would it be proportional or not at all? I mean, after all, if you have to help 2,000 birds versus 20,000 birds, maybe you would want to give more to 20,000 birds, okay, because probably accordingly. The same should go with every time you talk about we are helping 2,000 senior citizens, whether 20,000. So that should affect the willingness to pay and to help. But actually, it didn't. Okay, no matter what the numbers were, people were actually willing to give similar numbers: 80, 78, 88. So as if the scope of and the numbers did not affect, and as Daniel Kahneman explains, one of the best psychologists and Nobel laureate, explains, the story probably evokes for many readers a mental representation of a prototypical incident. So, just like the story with Florence Owens ignited an image, a prototypical incident, a face to the statistics, a story to the numbers. And this increased either the willingness to pay, willingness to act, or actually the willingness to do something. So think about it. We're now living in a world where we have so many great statistics to share. I mean, some of them are scary, of course, but we mostly rely on facts and statistics to change people's behavior. We think, okay, if we shared with people of how many people are actually affected by the fourth wave and how many of them were not vaccinated, we're going to change people's mind and get them vaccinated. That is actually not working this way, because people are suffering from this kind of bias, which is scope insensitivity. But the minute they hear a reliable, convincing story from someone who is reliable to them and who they trust, that is when some things are changing. And of course, the story has to have a certain pattern to it. So I think I do know that for now, you probably know and you're convinced that it's good to use stories, okay? Because they boost retention, they prove, they give meaning, and they also make people act accordingly, which is something that you cannot just achieve with statistics and facts. So where do stories actually work best? So that's the question. So, probably not everywhere, but, I would dare say that it's almost everywhere. I mean, in education, in public sector, in health sector, also in business, in marketing. But I would say that if you are using your storytelling to convey messages, so the best way to use it is to inform senior citizens, okay? When you inform, when you do informational campaigns, when you have announcement, it's great to shape them in the form of a story. When you're explaining policies, so why do we have to do something? Why do we have to change this? Why do we have to implement that? That is, again, explaining policies works best. Again, to persuading, to change people's belief, change people's minds, and change people's opinion about stuff. And then, of course, building authentic brand. And when it comes to storytelling, the companies already nailed it very well. And now I want to show you one very good example of something that is an incredibly well-designed story. And it's a corporate advertisement, but I will make sure that you will later on understand how you can implement that in storytelling for your public sector, in the public institutions for senior citizens, okay? Especially the story is actually about one such senior citizen who actually wanted to do something very much, and he nailed it in the end. So this is the advertisement from the Polish e-commerce giant, which is Allegro. Some of you probably know them. And this is a very beautiful story. And I know it's like, it's a Polish story, but at the same time, I'm pretty much sure that everyone here, no matter where you come from, no matter where you are sitting now around the Baltic Sea, you will definitely get it for sure. So let's watch it now, and later on I'm going to discuss with you what just happened.
English for beginners. I am, you are, he, she, it is. I am, you are, he, she, it is. Robert, I am. Hi. Can you show me the way to the beach?
Towel,
Breakfast.
fork, knife, bread.
I love you. You are perfect.
I'm gonna fucking kill you.
I'm gonna fucking kill you. I love you. You are perfect.
I thank you. Podpis.
Suitcase, slippers, toothbrush, passport, pajamas. Be good dog. Hi, I am. Hi, I am.
Passengers on flight Aerolíneas Argentina.
Hi, I am your grandpa.
Well, I guess even though this commercial was dedicated for the Polish market, most of you, if not all, made just sense out of what you just saw, because it's such a simple story. And let's think about it, what just happened here, and how you can actually translate that or use that to replicate the success in your stories, and how you can actually make use of that pattern in your communication, in your messages. And to do that, I'm going to share with you some drawings of mine. Okay, so let's think what we just had here. We had a story that started somewhere here, where we saw a hero, and slightly senior citizen, let's say, who decided he wants to learn English. Okay, so that was his motivation. I want to learn English. Okay, that was his motivation. To do that, he actually used the wonderful toolbox that was, the book, to learn. So that was his secret weapon to learn English. Okay, and then he started learning English. You can see even up front that when he first opened the book, he's really excited because there is going to be some nice challenge ahead of him. But then he kind of slightly saddens as he realizes that there's quite a lot to learn. If you're just beginner, and especially if you're like senior citizen, you might think to yourself, okay, this is quite a lot. Okay, so there is slightly, going slightly down. But then he really, does not give up. Okay, and this is something that is what makes this story really interesting, because he does not give up. So that is why we follow his stories. Okay, and even though if he makes, those funny little mistakes, like he mistakes fork for a knife, okay, probably some of you noticed that, we still keep our fingers crossed for him because we understand his struggle. You know, we can relate to his struggle. And that is the beauty of that. So then he continues, and then there's like this final climax moment when we finally realize and we know, why is he doing that? Because he wants to say, "Hi, I'm your grandpa," to his granddaughter, who he probably never saw because, you know, she is the daughter of his migrant son, probably with the love of his life that he met somewhere. And I would say in Britain. Okay, most people would say if they watch this advertisement, they know that it's they think that they know that it's Britain, actually where it's not clearly identified as Britain, but we think no. And I'll tell you why. I mean, especially if you're not from Poland, you will understand it very well. In Poland, we had like a huge number of Poles migrating to United Kingdom when the EU borders opened up. So and there was 2.5 million people. Actually, the largest minority in United Kingdom was Polish at that time. So, you know, that is exactly why they decided to give this context, because people can relate better to this story. Okay, this is a story about a person who decides to do something, to achieve something, in order to connect with his family. Again, very powerful, just like Anya wrote. That was powerful, and that was powerful because it was really simple. And now let's think about it. The only way we know that it's a commercial, it is because, you know, some of those means to an end, some tools are delivered by, you know, Allegro. Okay, this is like the secret weapons that he gets from Allegro to, you know, to achieve his goal. And let's think about and replace Allegro from one of your programs or one of your policies. Okay, so it is not the policy, it is not the new senior center, it is not the new tools or anything else. The programs for senior citizens, they are not the hero of the story. They are just means to an end, or they are a secret toolbox that you want to communicate. Okay, so again, you can think, okay, how we can give this story some meaning. Okay, of course, you have to find some real characters, real heroes who want to achieve something, but maybe struggle because they think, okay, all right, I'm a senior citizen. How on earth I can communicate with my family who lives abroad? And, you know, they always tell me to use Skype or FaceTime, and I have no idea how to do that. Okay, so then this senior citizen, they really clearly have, you know, some important job to do. They need to learn how to operate the computer, which is not easy. You know, I should know. My mom constantly struggles with it, but she goes to this amazing senior center where she, you know, first when she went, she was very excited, but again, kind of not so excited after she realized that there's quite a lot to learn here. Okay, and she was struggling, and then there was, you know, some people were using different. She had a different computer than the teacher, so she thought there was something wrong with her. But then she continued, and you know, now I must say that she's on the verge of being slightly addicted to the internet. I mean, she sometimes, you know, sends me links at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, okay, that there's something I found here. So, you know, now the next struggle for her is that she wants to learn how to operate Skype because she wants to connect with all her friends from the past and her cousins that are all across the world. Okay, so once again, she did it because someone allowed her to use this amazing toolbox, and that was organized by the city of Gdynia, where I live. And there's this amazing public policy of, you know, doing stuff for the silver tsunami people. So, of course, you should use real characters and real people with real motivations to communicate what you want to communicate, because the worst thing that you can actually do here is just to say the numbers behind those programs. Okay, so this is how much money we've spent to help senior citizens in 2021, or this is what we're planning for 2020. These are the struggles that we have, and these are the struggles in numbers. Well, it's so much better to attach a story to the statistics. I'm not saying you should not use numbers at all. I mean, use them, you know, wisely, but, you know, always have that, like, these power engine of the story up front, and later give the statistics and numbers. Okay, so that's exactly what the commercials did, and they did in a form of a probably rather expensive video, but you don't have to do that in the form of a very expensive video. It can be done in a form of an infographic. It can be done in a form of even a blog post or a message on the website, or something, visual, even with a video. But sometimes, even if you are using real characters and real authentic stories, even if you shoot it with a video, with a smartphone, it's going to be powerful. Okay, it doesn't have to be elaborate and doesn't have to be high budget, but it has to have some pattern to it, and this pattern can be best explained by a simple few words. So your story, when you are writing it, when you are scripting it, and when you are researching it, has to be simple, unexpected, credible, concrete, emotional in the form of the story. Okay, so what does it mean that the story has to be simple? Well, first of all, the story should happen in time, and it should be chronological in a simple pattern. Okay, so think about it more like a Steven Spielberg movie versus, a Bergman movie. Okay, so it's like, it should be rather simple, unfold in time, simple, events, turn of events. Not Bergman, not French New Wave, Nouvelle Vague. So that's the first simple. It also should be simple that it should relate to people's experiences. So of course you cannot replicate people's lives every time you tell a story, but there are certain patterns and certain motivations that we all very much understand. Okay, so the pattern of the struggle of wanting something very much and having some help from friends, this is something that we understand. The power of the struggle of the mother who wants her children to benefit from something, that's also very important. The struggle of the families, or the power of unexpected help from strangers, or how the life turns from some people just with a little help and spark from their neighbors. These are the things that we all relate to, okay, and they can all be conveyed in stories. The other thing that the story has to be, it has to be unexpected, okay? The stories that we all know how they end are not that exciting unless there is something exciting between the events. Okay, so for example, Titanic seems to be quite an expected story. Okay, you know that the ship sails in the end. I mean, nobody went to the cinema to watch Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio thinking, okay, maybe this time they will survive. Of course not. The story goes the way that it doesn't. But what happened is the unexpected, tense story between those two people from two different worlds that fall in love, and in spite of all, they still want to go on. By the way, I have an amazing story to share regarding Titanic. Some time ago, I worked with an institution that did not work with senior citizens, but that worked with adolescents and children who were drug addicts, and those people were those children were in a daily care where they would go for therapy, and they were greatly aided by amazing people. And I was one of the people who were invited there to tell them about the story of storytelling. Okay, and so I was very excited and very much honored, but also very afraid that I might do something that is not right, especially that, for example, I thought for a moment, okay, I'm going to bring them candy, I'm going to give them fun Coke and Coca-Cola, of course, and Coke, and I would give them that up front so that they would like me and we will have this nice relationship. But the lady that contacted me said, no sugars, no nothing. I mean, they are in rehab, those kids. They cannot have sugary drinks, they can have chocolate and stuff like that. Nothing that is agitating. So then I realized, okay, this is really serious. I have to be very prepared. But I did my workshop in storytelling for those children so that they can create new stories for themselves, because stories can also shape us and give the meaning to the things that happen. So the story of the recovering addict could be also a very powerful one. So what happened then, I just gave them stories, and I asked them to draw a drawing of the story that they most relate to. And one of the guys was very shy. He didn't want to display his picture with everyone. But after the workshop, he came up to me and he showed me his picture. And I saw this picture, and it was like the picture of the sinking ship. And I asked him, okay, so what is it? And he said, well, I wanted to say that my life is like Titanic. And I said, oh my God, this is like such a sad metaphor. Of course, I didn't say that to him because I thought, okay, that's not. And I said, well, why do you think so? And he said, well, because no matter what, you still have to keep up the hope that everything will be okay. And I said, oh, that is so powerful. And I still remember that. It was really beautiful. So it was also unexpected. So again, you know, Titanic is rather an expected story, but you can make a lot of unexpected stories in between. Okay. The next thing, the story has to be credible. And what does it mean that it has to be credible? Once I asked somebody that, and somebody said, well, credible means that it's true. Okay, so if the story is true, of course it's credible. And I said, I wish that was the world we live in. Okay, if the stories that were true were credible and the stories that were lies were not credible, we would not have problems, you know, like we have all across the globe with, you know, fake news and politics who are lying. But you know, the credible means that we trust the people we hear the story from. But credibility also derives from simplicity. Okay, so if we follow the story with the cognitive ease, the story becomes more credible to us. But what also affects credibility is how concrete the story is. Okay, and that's another one. So, you know, even when I told you the story of those children who were working with amazing people, I said that I want to give them some gifts in forms of chocolate bars and Coca-Cola. You know, those were concrete objects. In your brain, when I say the words that build concrete mental representation, just like the apple, Coca-Cola, or chocolate bar, especially, you know, if it's like Milka chocolate, or if I say like the birds trying to get out of the oil spill, you have this mental representation. That means it is a concrete. Okay, so concrete is the opposite of abstract. And the problem with a lot of public administration is that very often we use words that are big but are also abstract. So people cannot relate to them because there is no mental representation for innovative solution that boosts your potential. Okay, so this is something that our brain does not fathom. So you better think about concrete examples or concrete words and story and wording. So the next element is, of course, emotional. Okay, so emotional means that you want those stories to evoke certain emotions. And actually, there are a couple of emotions that are best. Okay, the best emotion that you want to bet on is something that is uplifting. So things like joy, things like also elevation, like being touched by the story. So it can be slightly sad or slightly upsetting, but then if it gives hope, then of course it's very much important. Sometimes the stories can have a bit of a fear in them, you know, igniting fear, but then again showing the solution. So you might say something that makes people slightly scared or afraid, but then again you have to offer them the solution for that fear. And even if you want to make people angry with something, that's a good way, but of course don't make them angry with you. Because if they are angry, anger is such a hot, motivating, high energizing emotion. It's a negative one, of course, but it also is a very high energizing emotion. Think about it. Every time people get very angry, they go to the streets to manifest that because they are very, very motivated to do that. Okay, and so you can make people angry about something, like, for example, some pollution, pollution issues, or some unhealthy things that are happening. But again, you have to make sure that you are the leader of the story who takes them from that anger and kind of channels this anger towards action. And then, of course, it should be in a form of the story. So not all events form a story. Okay, if I told you that today I woke up around 5:15 and then I went to the gym to do my regular workout, then I came back, I took a shower, I did some work around the house, then I had my breakfast and my coffee, then I started to prepare for this very event, and then I once again read some books, and then I ended up at approximately 10 to 1 here. That is not a story. These are the events, but nothing really happened here. Okay, so because there is no challenge, there is no motivation, there is no high energy here, then there is not a story. Okay, so even if you have the events, that is not a story. So Those things, simple, unexpected, credible, concrete, emotional story, should be like the screen, how you filter your stories. You write a story and you think about, okay, is it a simple story? Does it pass the plain language test? Is it a unexpected story? Is it surprising? And is it credible enough because it's simple and concrete? And what sort of emotion does it form? Okay, so whenever you're using the story, you sell your ideas using the stories. So will the senior citizens buy it or not? Well, it greatly depends on a couple of factors. Well, first of all, is the senior citizen interested in the story? Meaning, like, do they ask themselves a question, is it really interesting to me? And if they answer yes or no. Is this story new? I mean, is it exciting because it's new and I want to hear it or read it or just, absorb it? Is it useful for me in a form that I get what it means to me and I can use the knowledge from the story or the takeaways from the story? Do I get the story? I mean, do I understand it? And do I get the meaning of it, the purpose of the story? And is it worth my time? Okay, trust me. I mean, even though most people think that senior citizens, they have a lot of time, yeah, they still value their time. So, they don't want to spend time on things that are trivial or just plain stupid or boring. Okay, so if the person listening, reading, absorbing your story answers all those questions negatively, I mean, I don't like it, then that's probably not going to sell the message that you want to do, because maybe the story is not interesting, it's not new, it's not useful. But if they answer those questions positively, they like it. So I don't buy the message versus I buy this message. And when will they actually buy this message? How to make sure or actually increase the chances of the message being delivered? Well, think about your process in a few steps. So the first step would be to think about the value, the purpose you give. Then there's the narrative. So this is the shape of the story, the plain sentences, plain language sentences, and the words. Then occasionally there will be a visual boost. Okay, if it's in a video, in a form, of course, it's going to be visual. If it's an infographic, then of course, if it's just a blog post, maybe yes, but also add some visuals, pictures that are relevant. And then, of course, in the form of a delivery, how you deliver it. I mean, do you deliver it online? Do you deliver it in an ephemeral Instagram story? So what is the way you deliver the story? Okay, and those form something that is either interesting, good, or not. Okay, so I like to think of it as of certain layers, and those layers they also form they form a process, how you should approach designing your story. So once again, I'm going to refer to my drawings, if I may. Okay, so if you think about it, the value of your story, the purpose of your story, the big idea of your story, so what is it that you want to communicate and why, is like the core of your story. So this is the value, the V. Okay, then once you establish the value of your story, you are ready to put it in a form of a narrative. Okay, the narrative is like the second layer that grows only if you have the good value. Then you may add a visual boost. So, whether it's a video or an infographic, but don't try to add visual boost or shoot the video without the clear value and the clear narrative. It's as if someone went out there and did some beautiful, shots of the universe and then thought, oh, let's make a movie out of it. Okay, no. Of course, first you have to think, okay, what do I want to say with this movie? Then how do I say it? And then you add a visual boost. Okay, and then you, of course, deliver it. And that is what you do. So you start with the value. Okay, then you go into the narrative. Then only you go into the visual boost, and then you deliver it to people using the platform and the communication online or offline, depending, of course, of what is that you do. So those four, they shape your story: the value, the narrative, the visual boost, and the delivery. And if you think about it, those four are equally important. But of course, the most important one is the core, which is the value. Okay, so how do you actually design the value for your next great story? It's good to ask yourself a couple of questions. So the first question when starting with a story is, what is the purpose of the story? So what is the objective? What do I want to achieve with that? Do I want people to remember to get flu shots the next season? Or do I want people to understand that there is great way to improve their cognitive functions with exercise that we offer in our senior center? Do I want to communicate them the uneasy decision of having to cut down on some programs? Or do I want to convince them that, it's safe to use the public transport? Whatever is the purpose. So what is this purpose that you want to achieve? Then what is the big idea that you want to convey? Okay, the big idea, don't be scared of the name. It doesn't have to be big like in Einstein, Copernicus, or Newton, but it has to be relevant big idea. So the examples of big ideas, the stress does not kill you, but what can kill you is thinking that stress can kill you. Okay, that's a big idea that comes from the TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal. Or, the third part of your life from 60s to 19 can be the most amazing 3 decades of your life. Use it wisely. Okay, that's an idea that Jane Fonda previously shared. Okay, so what is the purpose? What is the big idea? And why it will matter to the people, to the audience that I give it to, that I produce it to. So that is about the value. Think about the value first, give some notes, give with your team some brainstorming, and you can not go wrong with those questions. Once you have the value, it's actually time to, do something else, which is the narrative. Okay, you've got the value, you want to have the narrative. The narrative, of course, have to be simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and story that but it should also be well planned using those two very important axes. Okay, so the one axis, the narrative should also be using plain language. Plain language is, actually a plain language act, which is in a form of regulations that regulate plain language, so that people working in banks, public institutions, administration, and government do not kill others, and especially their attention, with a complicated jargon and gargantual sentences. So the plain language works very well with the narratives. Don't be afraid of using plain language. Clear motivation is who is telling the story and why they are telling the story, but also who are the people and the real people in the story. Okay, I mean, this is not that I do not believe that you can be as good of a writer as Tolstoy, Tolkien, or Zola. But the thing is that it's so much better just to write or create stories about real people, what happened to real people. There's some amazing energy to that. And then the narrative should be planned around those two axes. So the first axis is the beginning of the story and the end of the story. And then you have another axis, which is the plus, which represent ideas, excitement, everything that is good in a story. And the other one is the minuses, which is all the challenges, trouble, and everything else. And that each and every story should go from beginning to the end, but it should also form like a roller coaster ride. The story should never be like a flat line, because that would mean probably that the story is, excuse the language, dead, or seriously dead if it's a flat line. Okay, so you want the story to form a roller coaster, just like the roller coasters that Kurt Vonnegut discovered when he analyzed all the stories across the globe. Okay, so Kurt Vonnegut, as probably all of you know, is a great storyteller. And Kurt Vonnegut decided to embark himself on this journey where he wanted to see if there is something in common with the stories. So he did found something, that most of the stories, they form a similar shape, and those shapes can be traced in a lot of stories. So The first shape that he discovered was the shape that is called the man in a hole, which is that the main character of your story, maybe a senior citizen, gets in trouble and then, of course, gets out of it again, and better off for the experience. And these are the examples of the stories are setting an old place. Harold and Kumar go to White Castle, but also a lot of other stories that just happen with someone who seems to have a regular, normal life, but then he gets in trouble. And then, of course, someone helps him and he pulls out of this trouble. Then there is the boy meets girl, okay? The main character comes across something wonderful, gets it, and then loses it. It doesn't mean that this has to be a sort of a situation where the boy always meets the girl. It can be something different. It can be something different. It can be that the main character comes across something wonderful, gets it, loses it, and then gets it back forever. Okay, the next thing is the creation story. The creation story. And the creation story is that in many culture creation stories, humankind receives incremental gifts. And this is very important because it forms like this nice shape where people are getting more and more and more. Of course, this is not a very similar story for the Western culture, but then you have something else. You have the Old Testament. Of course, I'm not saying that this is all strictly religious, because as you can see, there is a great expectation, which is a similar story. Whereas, the story is that you get everything that you can get, and then you fall. This is usually used when you use cautionary stories. So the cautionary stories are about the people who disrespected something, or the heroes that had it all, but then hit the the big low. Okay, the New Testament is offering like this different story. It's actually the Great Expectations from Dickens, with Dickens' alternate ending, where you fall and then you rise again. And then Cinderella is also the type of the story, the shape of the story that you might want to use. Then there are the type of stories that you probably not want to use. The first one is called the Which Way is Up? And this is like Hamlet, which shows the ambiguity of life, and we never know what is right or wrong. And then there's the other one, which is From Bad to Worse, which is usually the metamorphosis or the Kafka kind of scenario. Okay, you don't want a Kafka scenario in your stories. What I would say you could use the most is either the man in the hole, boy meets girl, or maybe even the creation story, how it all goes, but then it should have a bit of a twist. So what shape is your story? Okay, what is the shape of your story is the great question. But of course, when you're shaping the story, you should think about, first of all, there is the story that always begins. And the story begins in a certain environment where we meet the main character, the hero, or the heroes of the story. But they have to be clear people who have clear motivations, and they have clear incentives. The story could or should happen in a significant place. Of course, you don't have to make sure that this is a very well described place, but of course, if you're shaping the public policies, then of course you might want to think about a specific place. Then time. Okay, it can be a very specific time per se. So, for example, if you're referring to a story that happened on a special date, use the special date. And then, of course, in this very setting that is formed by the hero and his life and his time, something happens. Usually there is a challenge. Okay, so with this challenge, you drop. This challenge usually means trouble or something that is challenging. If you are telling the story of how you thought of certain policies, definitely you will be the ones who will notice the challenge. But if you have a challenge, you want to have an idea how to solve the problem. So you go up. Sometimes with that idea seems great on the paper, but then it forms other challenges. So for example, you are starting to run out of the money and you drop again, but then you'll find a way to get out of the trouble and you go up again, and then probably you stay up. So most stories that are uplifting, they have this type of the shape of the story. And this is also true for the story that you're about to hear, which is the story of how people implemented and help patients in care in one of the institutions. And that is a shared story that I want to share with you.
It's always been a problem for patients who are on dialysis or on peritoneal dialysis or home dialysis to be having to come to the clinic, stuck in the car park trying to park the car and then come and wait in the clinics and then have about 10 minutes with the doctor and then off he goes.
It's time that you've lost that you're never going to get back. And in our condition, it exacerbates the time loss.
So I think one of the things which we looked at as a renal team was to look at telemedicine, but it's never been done for the renal patients in the UK. Traditionally, NHS works on a hospital-based, primary care-based approach.
People that are maybe cared for by their daughter or their son, then they have to actually take time out of their working day to bring them to hospital.
And now there is a significant shift towards putting patients in the middle of it and providing a service which suits the patients. For you as a patient, it's no different to having a consultation in the hospital, but takes away the hassle of coming in.
The models are changing as well. The technology is changing very rapidly.
Every aspect of care is actually set up in a way which is easy to adopt for the patients.
And what they don't particularly want to do is spend an awful lot of time either in hospital or interacting with us. They want to spend less time rather than more time.
Our nurses would spend a lot of time in their cars driving around 2 or 3 counties to reach these patients.
So when we thought about it, we thought that telemedicine would be a very good way of providing care and also trying to improve the quality of care which you receive.
And it certainly reduces that burden on our nursing staff.
So particularly for haemodialysis, the support they require from the hospital is huge.
We could have audio-video clinics with patients in a set time with the patient's convenience. They don't need to come to us.
I can already see a use for it in the other long-term conditions such as respiratory medicine.
We have got quite a few projects coming through, not just from the renal point of view.
We've obviously had to do a bit of changing in getting the rooms that we're going to use for the televideo, but generally it's not too invasive and fits in well with the infrastructure that we already have within the hospital.
We do need to get patients doing their treatments more at home, and I think having a layer of support like a audio-video conference clinic setting gives them that added support for them to take the plunge.
So it's more of a partnership between the patient themselves and our home therapies unit and home therapies nurses and the medical staff as well.
IT in the healthcare industry is an enabler.
The point is that the patient is at home, so you can actually have a conversation with the patient from anywhere you want from the hospital within reason. And I think that gives you added level of flexibility and the fact that you can actually bring in people into the call.
A lot of the infrastructure we already had in place in terms of the equipment we're putting into the trust.
I think it's been slow to take off, mainly because of how the technology works within the NHS.
The challenge is to make sure we get certain things right, the privacy elements.
The point has always been putting it within a secure environment.
Where this video link is just personalised to the hospital and my television. Nobody else's television, just my television. And to me, that's more personal, and I wouldn't want it to go anywhere else.
A dialysis nurse, when they educate a patient to manage their care in a home setting, there's always that worry about risk.
There's quite a bit of training involved for the patients and they need ongoing support as well because they do sometimes encounter technical problems.
Even in 2003, we used to run a telephone clinic for transplant patients.
To be able to get a clear idea of what it is that is actually wrong with the patient or what they're calling up for, you have to ask a variety of questions before you actually get to the nitty-gritty of what the problem is and how you can solve it.
But actually, when you can't eyeball the patient, it's just a barrier to that communication.
To be able to either address the technical problem themselves, or we need to be able to provide them with the support to be able to deal with it ourselves, but reasonably quickly.
And the fact that you can see a patient, you can see how they hold themselves, and you can actually tell whether they're unwell or they're worried about something. It's that visual check.
And there is a different feel to a clinic where you see someone over a camera.
The emphasis should always be that it complements a direct clinic visit, but it's not envisaged to be a replacement for that.
There's a much more relaxed feel, but actually it's clear that in some ways the patients prefer that, and they do interact with you in a different way, which is I think quite a good thing.
Right. So this time I did not tell you the story. Somebody else told you the story. But as you can see, the story also was in a nice shape of a story. When there was the challenge first, that was the challenge of so many who did not want to waste time, and by this, to avoid the lack of compliance in patients with diabetes. And then they decided to go into an idea of the telemedicine. But again, they had other challenges: how to implement it with people who are often senior citizens, and how to have the idea to do that. Maybe they will be technology reluctant. So then they shaped it, and of course, towards the end, everybody was happy, and they lived happily ever after with a toolbox that was the telemedicine. Okay, I'm simplifying it, but it is a simple story. Okay, and remember one more thing: whenever you are telling the story and you are saying to yourself, "I want to tell you a story," you have to remember who the I is. So you are a policymaker and a person, but at the same time, you are a person who has a perspective, who cares, who wants to communicate something. So who is the I? And then who is the you? Who are the people I'm telling the story? So whenever you're doing, I want to tell the story, use the active voice, never passive. Okay. I instead of it is being done. The I and who's behind it. Then the you. And how do you refer to your audience? How do they have to remember and imagine that it's all about them? And I want to tell you the story means that you really always have to have your why, the purpose, your how, the structure of the story, and then the platform, which is your what. That is all for me. I'm waiting for your question if you should have any. I've dedicated 15 minutes for that.